Before I move to the next speaker, I'd like to welcome Ballyclough National School from Mallow and Cork. You're very welcome. Hope you enjoy your visit here today. So, thank you. Senator Mary Seary Carney.
Thank you, Cathaoirleach. Minister, it was 10 years ago last month since I sent my first email to a predecessor of yours for asking for a legal framework for surrogacy in Ireland. So I want to begin by congratulating you and the team for the exceptional work that has gone into this bill. I am very grateful to the Department of Health officials, to Pamela, Edward and Colm and others, the Interdepartmental Group, the Minister for Justice and Children, but especially to you, Minister, for your commitment to drive a legal framework to provide oversight and regulation for the fertility treatment of residents in Ireland. I want to acknowledge the work of the Joint Oireachtas Committee on International Surrogacy, who diligently worked making recommendations for an ethical framework for surrogacy based on the internationally accepted Verona principles. Lastly, I want to acknowledge those here in the gallery today. The amazing champion of Irish families through surrogacy, Cathy Wheatley, here representing that incredible organisation of mammies and daddies who have passionately and selflessly lobbied for this legislation, along with Irish gay dads and equality for children. A special welcome to Ivana Hollop, herself a surrogate mother, all of whom are my fellow travellers and noble advocates, all of whom are holding their breaths for this legislation. I want to particularly acknowledge those who are here to support me personally. My closest friends and colleagues, my own family, my husband David, my daughter's siblings, my stepchildren Ian and Michelle Carney, and most of all, my parents Pat and Patsy Seary. I've told my story of playing being a mother as a child. I never imagined that motherhood would not happen, or that my pathway to being a mammy myself could be strewn with tragedy and loss. But it isn't just about me or the other mothers and second dads, those who are already parents and those who dream of being parents. It isn't about them. It's also about the ordinary heroes on these journeys, like my parents, like my daughters, grandparents, Pat and Patsy Seary, grandparents through the wonderful science of fertility treatment, grandparents who withheld and masked their own grief while comforting and supporting their only child through the heartache and disappointment as we faced loss after loss and defeat after defeat. Grandparents who lit candles and cried out to God for the injustice of our grief. Grandparents who travelled abroad for the IVF treatments and eventually happily to the birth of our baby. Grandparents who sat in a hospital anxiously awaiting the birth of their only grandchild. Grandparents who are completely devoted to her. Grandparents who, under the laws of this state, have no legal standing in their relationship with her. They are denied legal recognition. That is, until now, Minister, and until this bill that you are bringing through. We'll get into the debate and the provisions and details of the bill at the committee stage, but it needs to be said that this bill provides for a very wide range of oversight and provisions regulating assisted human reproduction in all of its forms, and it is to be welcomed and celebrated. The bill establishes an assisted human reproduction regulatory authority to license fertility service providers, research, donor-assisted human reproduction, surrogacy both nationally and internationally, as well as making provisions for past surrogacy parental orders. It is imperative for this for the IVF treatment scheme. When the first test tube baby, Louise Brown, was born in 1978, a whole new frontier of hope and possibility was opened up for couples experiencing infertility. No one that I know believes that they have a right to a child, but everyone, including me, believes that we should have a way of being able to try for a baby, to give substance to the inherent human instinct to have your own child. Science has afforded the otherwise hopeless in that journey the opportunity to try and become parents. The capabilities of science shouldn't be without guidance and oversight. It is right that there are guardrails imposed within which science should operate, and that the human dignity of all involved is protected and promoted, and this bill does precisely that. Surrogacy for women who want to be mothers is not a first choice. In fact, no woman wants to see another woman carry their baby. No woman wants to feel someone else to feel the first flutters of their baby kicking in someone else's body. Our bodies monthly remind us of that yearning and that failure. Any woman who desperately wants to have a baby wants to carry that baby herself. When the Constitutional Convention voted on marriage equality in 2013, a total of 81 members recommended that the state should enact laws incorporating the changed arrangements that necessarily flow from the recognition of marriage equality in regard to parentage, guardianship and the upbringing of children. Apart from adoption and fostering, the only way for a same-sex male couple to have a baby is by surrogacy. Women volunteer to become surrogates for a whole variety of reasons. I established an online support group for parents and intending parents back in 2014 and was surprised by the number of women who contacted me asking how to become a surrogate. I had to reply with the stark truth, warning about the legal realities in Ireland of becoming a surrogate. I don't deny that there are those who seek to exploit and coerce women into becoming surrogates, nor do I deny that there is a very small number of desperate intending parents who do not sufficiently interrogate the human rights of the surrogate, or that an even smaller number do not uphold the rights of a child to know their origins and biological identity. This bill addresses those concerns comprehensively, cogently, carefully and conservatively. I looked at the online nameless warriors, the followers who claim members of this chamber as their champions. They claim to be the voice of surrogates, while viciously and disgustingly discussing the families, children and motivations of those of us who advocate, who spout lies, misrepresentations and bigotry, pushing an agenda of discrimination, stigma and hate. This government made a policy decision to ban commercial surrogacy both domestically and internationally. While I understand that policy decision and the need to avoid any implicit associated moral hazard, it needs to be said, though, that it is wrong to characterise all surrogacies with a commercial element as being unethical. It is wrong to create an inference that any birth involving a payment to a surrogate was by default exploitative. It is wrong to permit even the slightest stigma to attach to the children born from such arrangements or their parents, or it is wrong to presume that such surrogates were totally without agency. We must acknowledge that the policy decision, which I support, is very likely to cause disproportionate hardship to same-sex males couples who have much narrower choices of where to go to be supported in having a family together. While I am optimistic that surrogacy in Ireland will open up for them and that ethical choices will still remain, there is a fear and legitimate hurt and anger amongst our LGBT brothers at the disproportionate impact of that decision upon them. The legislation provides a legal avenue for the recognition of parental relationships between parents and their children by creating a 3-year window in which existing families whose children are denied the lifelong parental standing on relationship and legal relationship with both of their parents can apply to the High Court for parental orders. There will be a huge anxiety until the first of those parents walk out on the steps of the High Court with their parental orders in their hands. Families have already had gruelling and financially costly experiences in getting parental recognition for the biological fathers of their children when applying also for guardianship and custody. Many of us have been to court on 2 separate occasions trying to ensure that our children had all of the parental protections that they deserve, that they had equality. And at that last moment, we have had the experience of the CSSO changing the rules based on their own changing interpretations at the last minute without legislation and without explanation. I welcome your clarifications, and you couldn't be clearer and more direct today, Minister, in ensuring that your policy intent and the supplemental provisions will give no one a right over to veto a parental order application against what is the best interests of a child, and that the criteria for past surrogacy applicants will not be so onerous as that few will only be able to meet it. So I thank you for that. I remember today and want to pay tribute to Selena Bonney, the amazing reproductive rights advocate who died earlier this year. I want to be sure in her name that no one with a disability is excluded from accessing fertility treatment. I want to also acknowledge those who feel left behind for now in this legislation and who will keep on the battle and hoping that the September supplementary bill will address their concerns. They are the same-sex female couples whose children remain excluded from parental recognition from both of their parents. The cervical cancer survivors of the 221 group, many of whom have experienced relationship breakdown from the strain of their misdiagnosis and subsequent dramatic surgeries and treatment, and who need donor-assisted surrogacy to have a child but are unable to qualify under the criteria set out because alone they cannot provide a biological link for their much longed-for child. Minister, I sat through every minute of the legislation so far as it made its way through the Dáil. All sides of the House agreed, that's why there wasn't a vote, that it is urgently needed, that it is comprehensive in its provisions. Much will be said in this House about it being too liberal, and while the concern of the lower House was actually that it's not liberal enough. I want to also note that there were previous reports, there was pre-legislative scrutiny. This has gone back over at least 8 years, the scrutiny and the public opportunity to input into this. I want to end with a short verse written to a surrogacy-born child that I came across in my journey, and in reading it, pay tribute to the wonderful women around me and the men, but particularly the women who have endured terrible sorrow and loss on their way to that precious moment of holding their babies. Not flesh of my flesh, nor bone of my bone, but very remarkably all of my own. And I never forget for a single minute that you weren't born under my heart, but in it. Thank you.
Thanks very much indeed.